Well, hello, everybody. We are back for another Bible story reading. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, let me tell you what we do here. We go through different stories of the Bible for people who don't know what the stories are. Maybe you've never actually read them for yourselves, or maybe you've just heard bits and pieces that somebody else had told you, and maybe you've always been curious as to what the stories are all about, but you didn't know where to start or who to ask, or didn't understand what you were reading. Whatever the reason, we go through the stories so that you can have some Bible literacy and know for yourself what it says. We've been going through the story of David, and David has been running from King Saul. David is God's chosen, anointed person who will become king after Saul is dead. But right now, he's on the run from Saul because Saul has been wanting to kill him. In our last reading, Saul had consulted a medium to find out what was going to happen to him, what was going on, because God had not spoken to him. So he went against what God wanted, and he consulted a medium and found out that he was going to die, that his life was going to come to an end, his and his sons. And for the last couple of years, David has been hiding out with the Philistines. And the king of the Philistines, a guy by the name of Achish, has been letting David stay in some land just outside of the inner city. And he's trusted David. David hasn't caused him any problems. They've gotten along just fine. And David has just sort of decided that his lot in life is that he's going to fight with the Philistines. And the Philistines have decided to go against Saul and his army, King Saul and his army. And Achish said to David, "You guys and your men are going to have to fight with us." Now that meant that David would have had to fight against his own people. But David was okay with that because David had learned to be loyal wherever God put him. So now we are on chapter 29. David has not actually gone to fight yet. This is just a discussion that he's had with Achish. So now we are starting with chapter 29 of 1 Samuel. The Philistines brought all their military units together at Aphek, while Israel was camped by the spring in Jezreel. As the Philistine leaders were passing in review with their units of hundreds and thousands, David and his men were passing in review behind them with Achish. Then the Philistine commanders asked, "What are these Hebrew doing here?" Achish answered the Philistine commanders, "This is David, servant of King Saul of Israel. He has been with me a considerable period of time. From the day he defected until today, I have found no fault with him." The Philistine commanders, however, were enraged with Achish and told him, "Send that man back and let him return to the place you assigned him. He must not go down with us into the battle, only to become our adversary during the battle. What better way could he ingratiate himself with his master than with the heads of our men? Isn't this the David they sing about during their dances? Saul has killed his thousands, but David his 10,000s. So Achish summoned David and told him, "As the Lord lives, you are an honorable man. I think it is good to have you fighting in this unit with me, because I have found no fault in you from the day you came to me until today. But the leaders don't think you are reliable. Now go back quietly, and you won't be doing anything the Philistine leaders think is wrong." "But what have I done?" David replied to Achish. "From the first day I entered your service until today, what have you found against your servant to keep me from going to fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Achish answered David, "I'm convinced that you are as reliable as an angel of God. But the Philistine commanders have said he must not go into battle with us. So get up early in the morning, and you and your masters, servants who came with you. When you've all gotten up early, go as soon as it's light." So David and his men got up early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went on to Jezreel. We are going to go on and read chapter 30 as well, and then we'll go back and explain everything. David and his men arrived in Ziklag on the third day. The Amalekites had raided the Negev and attacked the burned Ziklag. They also had kidnapped the women and everyone in it from the youngest to the oldest. They had killed no one, but had carried them off as they went on their way. When David and his men arrived at the town, they found it burned. Their wives, sons, and daughters had been kidnapped. David and the troops with him wept loudly until they had no strength left in them to weep. David's two wives, Ahinoam and the Jezreelite, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal, the Carmelite, had also been kidnapped. David was in an extremely difficult position because the troops talked about stoning him, for they were all very bitter over the loss of their sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. David said to the priest Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brought to him the ephod, and David asked the Lord, "What should I pursue? Should I pursue these raiders? Will I overtake them?" The Lord replied to him, "Pursue them, for you will certainly overtake them and rescue your people." So David and the 600 men with him went. They came to the Wadi Besor, where some stayed behind. David and 400 of the men continued the pursuit, while 200 stopped because they were just too exhausted to cross the Wadi Besor. David's men found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David. They gave him some bread to eat and water to drink. Then they gave him some pressed figs and 2 clusters of raisins. After he ate, he was revived, for he hadn't eaten food or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. Then David said to him, "Who do you belong to? Where are you from?" "I'm an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite man," he said. "My master abandoned me when I got sick 3 days ago. We raided the south country of the Cherethites, the territory of Judah, and the south country of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag." David then asked him, "Will you lead me to these raiders?" He said, "Swear to me by God that you won't kill me or turn me over to my master, and I will lead you to them." So he led them to them, and there were the Amalekites spread out over the entire area, eating and drinking and celebrating because of the great amount of plunder they had taken from the land of the Philistines in the land of Judah. David slaughtered them from twilight until the evening of the next day. None of them escaped except 400 young men who got on camels and fled away. David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken. He also rescued his 2 wives. Nothing of theirs was missing from the youngest to the oldest, including the sons and daughters and all the plunder the Amalekites had taken. David got everything back. He took all the flocks and herds which were driven ahead of the other livestock, and the people shouted, "This is David's plunder." When David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to go any further with him and had been left at the Wadi Besar, they came out to meet him and to meet the troops with him. When David approached the men, he greeted them. But all the corrupt and worthless men among those who had gone with David argued, "Because they didn't go with us, we will not give any of the plunder we have recovered to them, except for each man's wife and children. They may take them and go." But David said, "My brothers, you must not do this with what the Lord has given us. He protected us and handed over to us the raiders who came against us. Who can agree to your proposal? The share of the one who goes into battle is to be the same as the share of the one who remains with the supplies. They will share equally." And it has been so from that day forward. David established this policy as a law and an ordinance for Israel, and it still continues today. When David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder of to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, "Here is a gift for you from the plunder of the Lord's enemies." He sent gifts to those in Bethel, in Ramoth of the Negev, and Jatir, to those in Aroer, in Siphmoth, and in Eshtemoa, to those in Rakal, in the towns of the Jerahmeelites, and in the towns of the Canaanites, to those in Hormah, in Borasham, and in Athak, to those in Hebron, and to those in all the places where David and his men had roamed. Wow, we just read an awful lot. So there are 3 ways that we look at things in the Bible when we read them. What was it saying? We have to have reading comprehension. What was it saying to the people of the time? We have to look at the culture and the history of everything that we read and understand what was going on in context. And last, what, if anything, is it saying to us today? Well, what did we just read? We read that now the Philistine army is going to go after Saul in the land of Jezreel. And Achish tells David and his men, you go fight with them. So they go, and they're behind the Philistine troops. And the Philistine troop leaders are like, wait a minute, we don't want these Hebrew guys going with us, because how do we know that they're not going to get into battle and turn on us? Because they'll be like, no, we want to make peace with Saul. So they're like, we think they're double agents. We think they're corrupt. We don't want them in our army. And Achish says to them, he's like, you know what? They've been with me for a couple of years, and David has proven to be loyal to me. They're like, nope, we don't want anything to do with him. Send him back. So Achish goes to David and he says, they don't want you fighting with them, and I'm going to send you back. And David's like, what did I do wrong? I haven't done anything but be loyal to you. I've always been loyal to you. So Achish says, I understand that, I know that, and I trust you, but I'm sending you back anyway. So David takes his men and they start heading back to Ziklag. And, they're kind of a little down, man. They're ready to go fight with the Philistines. So they go back, and when they get back to Ziklag, they see that their entire camp has been burned down. All of their wives and children have been taken captive. And they're devastated. All of them are completely devastated. And now they're mad at David. They're saying to David, it's your fault that this has happened. And they are grieving the loss of their wives and their children. So David's beside himself. He said, I don't know what to do. So he consults God, which is something David always did. He always went to God for answers. And he says to God, he says, should I go after these people that took our children and our wives? And, what should I do? And God says, yes, you should go after them, and you will recover everything that has been taken. So he sets out with 600 men, and they start going. Now, these guys are still upset. They've just been through a very traumatic experience. They were all amped up and ready to go fight with the Philistine army. Now they're told, we don't want you. They have to head back home, this journey back home. They get there, they find out their wives have been taken. I was like, what else could go wrong, right? And they get to this Wadi Beser where they're going to cross over into this other region. And some of the men are just flat out exhausted. It's been a long road for them, and they are wiped out, and they're like, look, we can't go on. We've got to stay here. And so David lets them stay there and kind of protect some of their supplies and stuff. And the other 400 of David's men go with him. So they go, and as they're going, the men find this Egyptian man wandering around in the wilderness, and they bring him to David, and David's like, who are you? And he says, well, I'm with these people who just raided Ziklag, the place where your wives and sons have been taken from. And David's like, show us where they are. Now, they fed this guy. They treated him really well. They kind of won him over. And he's like, all right, I'll show you, but please promise you're not going to turn me over to them. And David's like, we promise. So shows them where their camp is, and they see that these guys are celebrating. They're all excited because they just plundered David's camp. So David and his men go in, and they slaughter everybody. They get all of their wives back. Everything that was taken from them, and then some, they got back. Everything. So they get it back, and there are 400 men of these troops, the Amalekites, that had taken their wives and children, that they get kind of scared. They're like, and they run away. They get on their camels, and they get out of there. They get back to the Wadi Beser, where some of those men were really exhausted and that had just been kind of minding the supplies in the camp. And the guys who had actually made it on to the Amalekite camp and gotten the wives and children back, they're like, we're not sharing any of our plunder with them. They were lazy and they just stayed here. And David's like, no. When one of us succeeds, basically all of us succeed. And then he went on to make a law even later saying that Just because you might have been the one that fought, but everybody gets to participate in the victory. So they take all of this plunder, they get all their wives back, they get back to the camp, and David sends out gifts from the plunder to all of the places that he has been, that have been kind to him, that he's loved, to just kind of spread the wealth, share the wealth sort of deal. And I think that was really sort of a message to everybody, saying that, God is the one that is the victor here. Well, that's what we read. That's a little bit for us to understand of what's going on. Is there anything that this might be saying to us today? I find it incredibly interesting that David was all ready to go fight with these Philistines, and he was told no. Had David not gone back, they may never have recovered their wives and children. Sometimes in the middle of seemingly bad stuff, really it's because God is trying to protect us and give us something better. So it's a good thing that the Philistines said, we don't want you to fight with us, go home. They needed to go home so they could go get their wives and children back. They had to go rescue them. Now, they didn't know that at the time. All they knew was we've been rejected and we didn't even do anything wrong. We're good dudes. So rejected and feeling upset, they go back and find out it's a darn good thing we went back. I'll tell you a little story. Many, many, many years ago, it's probably been 30 years ago or more now, I got sick at work. And I wasn't feeling well, and I went home for the day. I went home about 4 hours early from work, 4 or 5 hours early, and I just was not feeling good. And I walked into my house, and I smelled something burning. And I was pretty upset about leaving work because I really couldn't afford to miss work, and I just did not feel well. And I get back home, and I smelled something burning in our bedroom. Evidently, that morning, I had been doing my hair with a curling iron, and it did not get turned off. And it had fallen into a pile of clothes, and that pile of clothes was smoldering. Had I not gotten sick at work, I never would have went home early, and our house would have gone up in flames. God knows what is going on around us, behind us, in front of us, beside us, even when we can't see it. And so that's what happened here with David. David didn't know that his family had been taken. None of the troops knew that their families had been taken away, but God knew. And it seemed to them that something bad was happening, that they had just been rejected from fighting with the Philistines, when in fact, something good was happening. I think that is a wonderful lesson for us to carry in our lives when we're going through dark times in our lives, things that we don't understand, things that we're upset about, to know that really God is in control, and these things may be happening to protect us for what reasons we may not know. So I hope you got something out of today's reading. When we come back the next time, we're going to finally finish up with 1 Samuel, and I hope you've learned something today. I look forward to us being together again. In the meantime, have a great day, and God bless.